Can you move over to this side, please? Thank you, sir.
And sun, sun, and other direction. And feet together. Okay. And knees slightly, few circles. And other way. Okay. Each shoulder width apart. Lift forward. Just straight leg. Straight leg goes. Each. Go. Rook. Seach. Touch. Two. Switch feet. Each. Go. Rook. Seach. Switch. This time.
Remember what he did.
Shoulder.
Memorize it.
Each.
Just like
Go. Get a little more of the shoulder apart. Keep your back up. Don't arch your back. Keep it flat. Reach down with your hands. You're going to go to your left. This is more of a mobility drill, more of a mobility stretch. Breathe in on your way up. Exhale on your way down. Going to the left. Each. Deep.
I haven't seen that in 40 years.
Son.
This supposed to be all those. Are they?
She.
Is that all the doses?
yeah, pretty much.
Go. Arch the back. Get to the top. She. Go. And go direction. Each. Son. She. Go. It's warmed up. Hey. Okay, everybody sit down. Get up there.
Okay. Okay. I would like to explain each exercise, its value to the karate, you perform the karate movements that are part of your style, consistent with practice. On each movement, it directly relates to karate. All the way. You are also welcome very much to disagree with everything he says. Because if you don't, I have to do that, and I want to do that. You said this is a panel. So with my panel, please, remember I said the panels would just kind of develop themselves? So my panel's sitting down up there, going to bring your chairs up here. They're going to push you, not me.
Is that the same as stepping one step backward?
I'm not letting you sit in the back of the room. Get up front. Bring your chair. That goes for you too. You can stand here so everybody doesn't have to look back.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I have started the question. So, I can see how I want the questions to come. Start asking on a specific exercise. You repeat my question.
Okay, tell us how the value of the leg raise relates to karate.
Start with mobility in the hips. Also starting to get the joints to move, including the joints, getting some blood flow to the muscles that move. In this case of the hip, the back, etc. Getting preparation for rigorous training.
Here's my question. Why would you do ballistic stretching before you work up the muscles?
But
Why would you go ballistic stretch before you work up the muscles? What did you do to warm up the muscles before you did the ballistic stretch?
actually, we
You can
didn't
say nothing, it's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, this is what this is about, okay?
Right.
Now, what you're doing to come to everybody is not different than everybody else. We're not picking on you. You have to see my warm-up thing, which I explain what I do. Right? So that's what I picked you, just so you know.
Right.
So you're the guinea pig.
Right, sir.
Okay, so ask him another question. So we answered about leg raising. Why would you swing your leg this way?
To kind of target a different part of the hip.
What does it do to your hip flexor? Is that a natural movement of the hip?
Not really.
Why would you do it? Now you know why you're up here.
I understand.
And now you're at this part. Why would you do it?
I think it's just a creature of habit.
Yeah.
So,
We do a lot of stuff with different creatures that happen. What do you think the next one I'm going to pick on? Not that one. Knees. Do your knee exercise.
the knee circles.
Yes. How many karate movements do that?
A lot.
A lot of exercises do it. But how many karate movements do that?
Not many at all.
I'm waiting. Can anybody? Speak up. Is that how your knees are designed to move?
No, sir.
So why do we do that exercise?
It's
Well, how do your ankles move? Do you do an ankle exercise? Other than that? You could argue that you did something other than the ankles.
you did a hand exercise, and like an exercise.
Well, yeah. But you know, is that a karate exercise?
What about like Chi exercise?
I didn't know that Tai Chi is that listed.
Not with us.
Some of it. You guys speak louder.
The sequence of everything he went through is the kind of thing that we used to do before we
Could I interject? Are you suggesting,
I'm asking questions, I'm not suggesting anything.
Well,
What do you think I should be suggesting?
implicit in your question is that a warm-up exercise for karate should be specific to a karate movement. Am I understanding your question?
Yes,
Okay.
but that doesn't mean that it's a black and white answer. So what do you think? Repeat your question.
Is a karate warm-up exercise, should it mimic or somehow be tied to a karate type movement? Or, should there be a general exercise such as warming up the muscles that may or may not be found in karate? Or some yoga that may or may not be found specifically in the type of karate we do?
Anybody like to comment on that?
I think in general, when you think about moving in kata or kwanbu, you're going to be shifting and turning your ankles and knees and whole body. And I think it's going to be important that we just get the blood flowing, get the movements and the joints all active, and blood flowing in those joints. Because I think we're going to use all of those exercises, we're going to use all of those movements in kwanbu, kata, turning, kicking. Those are all core foundations of things that we have to do what we do.
How do you know when you've done enough exercise?
I can't hear you.
How do you know how many reps of the stretches you're going to do? 5 years, 10 years, 20
How much time you have left?
In my training, it really depends on how I feel. If I get a heart rate moving,
So you did have it felt this morning.
excuse me, sir.
You did have it felt this morning. Why didn't you do how they felt? There's a difference. If you're teaching your class, who do you do it? Do you let you feel it, or do you let the class feel it, or needs it?
Depends on the class.
That's what they're going to
Kids, you're going to adults, you're doing different things.
And so the type of class might affect your warm-ups. Is that what you're suggesting, Mr. Riker?
Yes.
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 So, what's your general population in your class? What are they there for? Are they there for overall fitness and variety? You may do a different warm-up. If you have your free fighting night, I don't know where I would go too far afield on the general warm-ups unless it was aerobic or anaerobic oriented. Okay, I might increase the reps of some of those things because of that nature of that. Or maybe I'd pick it up in the drills later on. That's probably the anaerobic. But I may stay more in karate specific movement.
Oh, you're
How much
fine.
time do you have in
Dave,
that
come on.
class? How many repetitions do you do? You want to do the whole class and your warm-ups? Anybody trained in the dojo, in the hobbits, like in the 80s? Now, how long are those warm-ups? 20 minutes. You go 30 minutes. 30 minutes warm-ups, 30 minutes of mindfulness. That's what I had. We take that first hour of warm-up and mindfulness. It's a combination.
We had 2-hour classes.
That's one. Yeah. But for most of you guys, that takes longer than your whole class. So, on the average, how much should you warm up before you stretch? What is the principle, since it really accepted as a course physiology principle, of how long you need to work your muscles up before you do a stretch?
Just 10, 15 minutes until they're viable.
How long do you stretch?
I guess it depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to achieve more flexibility, trying to improve your flexibility. You can do a lot.
How long?
50 minutes.
There's your class. You just blew your whole class.
So here's a question, back in the 80s, we used to warm up for 20, 30 minutes and stretch for that. But we had high time limit kicking. If you look at the general consensus of the Kwanmukan navigators, are not high.
Yeah, but we also didn't warm up in the correct order either. We didn't follow a warm-up principle before we got into our stretching. Okay, I switched to stretching to the end of the warm-up. We used to do stretching at the beginning of the warm-ups. Then I switched the order. Okay, purpose. And so, yeah, on purpose. But even there, my switch had issues. Because I would do the movement exercises first, which also meant that at some point after we did the basic ones, I would do the leg raise, which is basically I was going to call your holistic stretch. Okay, so some of that I couldn't get around. But then we did switch to more of the exercises. So that the place was cold, the floor was cold, okay, and the only more place was a mat, and it was like about a 4 by 8 foot mat, and whoever leading class stood on the mat, and they were left the mat. Remember that? I remember no mats. I had one mat, one great mat, was in the front of the room. Okay, so anyways, you get cold. So we warmed up though. Okay, back then, 12 reps on the average for most exercises. More if you have more time, 16. But you see, all that creates time in your class. So you have to, so today you've got to design a class that gives some benefit of general exercise, would you agree? Some specific exercises, what you want to teach. Okay? That you may or may not want to tie to what your lesson plan is for that day, which most of you guys who teach don't have a lesson plan at all. Okay? So some of us have lesson plans in our head that we just simply, took class there or something. You would start a lesson plan and you do it for 6 months so you get that kind of a break. But even that, we should still sit and think before class and get it outlined in our head. Okay, so then the class proceeds in a way that it actually incrementally improves class. It's not you. You want to improve you, go do your own workout. I want to work out, you want to join me. That's a different workout. Then you can do it as many as you want. Okay.
Can I ask if anybody does stretching at the end of the class?
That's another thing. So, if you look at it, you can see that. Just trying to fill out this slide. Okay, so you can go down further, and you go down through some of those exercises, and some of them did not move like we moved or anything. You just don't do that. And even you admit that some of them may not be healthiest for your body. Okay? So, to do things the way you always did it is nuts. Unless you can validate with today's modern thinking. Rich and I were arguing about schema. What is schema?
Pattern? Pattern?
Huh? Schema. What is schema?
A pattern.
S-C-H-E-M-A. Huh?
Pattern.
A pattern.
Pattern.
Yes, be clever.
A formula. Pattern.
Pattern in which you learn something. What did you say it was?
A foundation of learning, a pattern
Foundation of learning.
a pattern of learning something.
Think a little more specific than that.
Is it order?
Order. Well, Anderson talked about schema, and he talked about how you learn, did he not? He talked about the development, he talked about the meaning, and what are those things? Well, those articles that he studied and the lecture he put together was from what year?
96.
85, 90.
So let's say I was later. Okay, so I was quite in the later times, probably around 95, 2000, something like that time frame. How many years has it been? How many years has it been?
20.
Do you think that thought on how you learn changed? Do you think that maybe some of those concepts were explored deeper? So has anybody studied that? So if you're studying Anderson, you study Anderson when he wrote it, you study Anderson when he wrote about it, and update yourself on that. Because it's the same thing. So if you want to know how people learn, you got to know modern common how people learn. Okay, if you want to do exercises, you need to modern common the exercises because we're better at designing exercises for specific purposes.
So then you have to consider how people learn. People learn differently.
Yes.
So you have to consider how people learn. So now you're going to need a class. How do you know how they affect class learners? How do you learn?
I'm visual and do at the same time. That's
Visual what?
visual while doing at the same time.
How do you learn, Todd?
It takes me a while to start to learn some things, like,
I'm still trying to get Keith to talk. How do you learn, Keith?
probably physical living stuff.
All right, so,
I got, Mr. Anderson talked about that you learn through what you see, 5% of what you see, 20% of what you hear, 60% of what you do, and 80% of what you teach.
there's many different ways to look at it. Some people talk about a cognitive learning mode. What's a cognitive learning mode? Huh? Yeah.
Yep.
How many of you have cognitively overloaded your students?
Everybody in the room.
Is cognitive overload, the amount you can take in at a time, affected by your emotion?
Yes.
So, if you have the emotion that this is hard to learn, how hard will it be? Will it be harder to learn than if you have the emotion that you can learn it? What is your self-efficacy in learning this particular skill? If you decide you can't do it, very, very difficult to learn. So, you as a team instructor, need to manage that in your class. If you're not managing that, if you present something that's too hard, and it's something that's going to take a lifetime to learn, your students are going to take a lifetime to learn it. Maybe Tom asks hard, we can probably get it down to 6 months. They'll learn the same thing in 6 months that somebody else can't learn for their lifetime. That sometimes is a problem with martial arts.
So specific to what we do here, if you go back to especially Okinawa, you run Sachinkan for 3 years, that is all you would do. That was it. And that was designed to create I would say, a physical schema to move on to learn other things. We learn about breathing, about movement, about switching directions, you learned about hardening the body. But it was all in one little back and forth form. Sometimes you didn't do the form, you just did it across the net. And what else did it do? It weeded out people who weren't willing to go through that learning process.
All right, so let's go. By the way, schema is like nuggets of knowledge that it's concept in your head. So you have a lot of different schema. In the initial thing that Anderson proposed, schema was treated more as a single entity, a single thing. But today it's considered something that a chunk of knowledge that automatically comes out of your head. So if you have never seen color before, and I say that's red, you have to look around everything else to figure out what red is. Now, when I say that's red, you look at red, you see red, you don't see the blue. But if you don't know what red is, you're going to see the blue, you're going to see the white, you're going to have to figure that out. You see? So if you take the word, memorize this. Y-R-E-M-E-M. Don't write it down, memorize it. Y-R-E, write it down, go ahead. Y-R-E-M-E-M. What is it? Okay, read back what you just learned. Tell me back, everybody, what did you just learn? Tell me. What were the letters? And to give me that back, what do you have to think of? Each individual letter, is that right? Well, why don't you just think of memory? Because that's the same thing I just gave you, and it wasn't just something like it. Look at the letters. Is memory spelled backwards? No, you're going to remember Y-R-E-M-E-N as memory spelled backwards. You now have taken effectively 6 different nuggets of knowledge, or 6 different schema that you had in your head and combined it into one. And then when you bring that process forward, learning becomes easier. And that's why you build on the skill. You build on what comes before. It's like breaking down something in parts and reassembling the whole, so that if you know the whole. That's why higher people who are better trained or well trained learn new concepts sooner, because they have more to relate to. So when they think about overloading the brain, that automatic process that happens automatically in the brain is more developed. So then in always they want to learn, you have a bigger area to store that in, where a beginner has to store more information on a complicated process. But if you lead them through the process over time, they don't have to do it in that fashion. And if that's cognitive learning theory, you can read about it and agree or disagree, so I'm not here to debate that. But I'm just here trying to get into the concept of how you need to put together what you do.
Actually, do you think that's a universal concept? Do you think it works with a non-alphabetic language like Kanji?
I don't never learn this, so I can't answer the question. I was talking about
Yeah, well, I'm curious.
people who know what a Y and R and E and D and M are. Yeah, but to break that down, I don't have any concept to do that. For me to break that down, I gotta go get the book. Okay, so look at all that. To me to break down the word memory, I don't have to get a book. But to break that down, I gotta go get the book of Kanji. And then I have to take each step of the way. And then I have to hold more things in my head. See, that's what cognitive learning is. And if you're affected by expectation or motive, which is basically emotion, we're talking about motivation here, then you change the person's how they approach what it is, the task that they're trying to learn. It doesn't make any difference which martial arts or what it is. So I would suggest that if you want to know more about Anderson's learning theories of how you learn, that you start reading some modern articles. Back to this. So, we're out of the segue. This is not the segue. So basic outline of karate practice. We have our exercises, warm-ups and stretching. Pretty much covers that. We go to our key home basics. This is how most classes are run. Individual techniques. I don't mean individuals technique. Individual single technique. Combinations. Kihon kata. What's Kihon kata? That's our Kwanmu. That is combinations, however you want to do it. Kwanbok, we have our relationship drills. We can use equipment, mats, and things like that. All that is in our Kihon basics. We call those life moves. All right, then we go to, what do we do at the meat of the class? Well, we can have a self-defense component. Okay, here are Waza. Releases, all that kind of stuff. Formal kata. Then do our kumite. Ippon basic, leading up to Jiu kumite. And then we do our esoterics, meaning karate dojo rules, things like that. That's not in every class. And that ends up with a cool down. And so you can see, the reason, what some of the stuff does. And just some other notes that would help, so your cardiovascular, strong, graceful body. And so this follows a general outline of karate class. Now some of this in the middle, you do one thing, and today you may not do everything in there. But this is kind of what we did. We're a 2-hour class. Sometimes we do 1 and 10. Sometimes I ran 2.5 hours instead of 1 and 2. What some people don't realize is that the dojo, Anderson didn't teach all the time in the dojo. A lot of times he let us run our own classes. Of course, there's always a fight to see who's going to be there, trying to control the class. Because then you can run the class and do the things you wanted to do. Which is exactly what I suggested you don't do. So some of the practices in the Hanbu weren't necessarily practices that made sense in the day. Okay? But they work well for 20 or 20-something testosterone-driven people. And I think that's what you've got to understand about the early days of the Hanbu. Okay? we didn't worry about whether it bothered our bodies. Okay, if we had to do it this way, we made our bodies do it that way. Okay, the problem with that, of course, is overusing. So, I would recommend you take about 7 minutes for your warm-ups. Okay, and about 7 minutes for the cool down. On a 45-minute class, that gives you 31 minutes for your intrinsic learning. What is intrinsic learning? It just means what it is you're supposed to learn. Intrinsic to that particular subject. It doesn't mean intrinsic in a philosophical sense. That schema can be used in more than one context of learning. Does anybody have any questions about the chart, what it shows? Because what I tried to do is outline what is, and put it in the fashion of possibly how it should be. So warm-up should happen before stretching. So how do you warm up? Since most of our exercises are stretches. Agree or disagree? Rich, you think most of the cardio exercises are stretches or warm-ups?
Once we did this morning.
No, no, that Rich.
Sorry, I was looking down here.
Mostly warm-ups. How much warm-up did you do in the beginning versus stretching? I'm hitting you because of what you, because everybody should have the concept of what you did. So that's our frame of reference. Okay, for the question. We're not picking on you, it's just to be creating a frame of reference. So in the frame of reference, what you did here, did you really warm up? What exercises would be considered warm-ups?
Yep.
I would say that one, but it has an element of ballistic stretching to it.
Right.
Okay? Keep going.
The mobility, circulations.
Yeah, but you said mostly joint mobility, not muscle warm-up. We didn't raise the body heat of the muscles. You worked on joint mobility, I won't argue that. But what did you do to raise up the body heat? Because aren't you supposed to raise the body heat before you stretch? Right or wrong? Agree or disagree? Now, you guys should all be thinking of your frame of reference, what you do when you do class. Okay? You guys do jump rope and all the kinds of stuff back there. Jump rope and all the kinds of stuff back there before you start. And you stretch at the end. But you follow a different class progression than a current class. And a martial art program that you run over there was based on sports principles, not on current principles. So sometimes the karate and the two bump heads, and your job is to make it work. Because I don't think you can avoid the bumping of heads, but you have to do it in a judicious manner. So you don't, even with your normal kicking, you never kick as high as you can. Especially if you have growth plates. Because to take these young kids that can flex all over the place and make them attack their growth plates by hyperextending the leg muscles, that's pretty unconscionable. But it's done every day in many Taekwondo schools. We don't do that. That's why we don't do that. Now, you're 20 years old. You want to go do that? Great. But I want you to demonstrate in front of my parents so they think I'm a good instructor. Because you have all this flexibility that I want them to think I trained you, I gave you, when you actually just have it yourself. Okay? You kind of follow the thinking. So it's good. I do stuff when I demonstrate that I would never do otherwise because it hurts my body. You know? But I have a purpose. I want to kill my body. I want to get some value out of it. So if I can impress somebody, you know, maybe it's worth it. But you see, I know the risks. If I do a ballistic stretch, I know the risks. The odds of me doing ballistic stretching safely are far greater than somebody who doesn't understand the risk. So some people argue you shouldn't do any ballistic stretching. Well, I'm not sure I agree with that completely, because I think a trained athlete who needs it in this particular sport can understand how to do it, can learn how to do it correctly, understand the risks, and know that yes, it can backfire. Then it becomes a choice.
Can't you change some of, quote unquote, like some of the stretching type of exercise movements he was doing, instead of doing it ballistically, do it in a gentle manner that actually stretches instead of forces?
Possibly. When I do the leg raises, I almost, most of the time I tell people start low. Start low, and as the repetitions go higher. Don't go as high as you can right from the get-go. I mean, I do that kind of thing. That's what I do. Okay, to try to cover that. Her suggestion is, you do some of this stuff a little slower so it's not ballistic. Okay, and that would mean that you don't stretch as far down. Okay, but as your body heat builds up and your muscles are able to do that, okay, then you can progress through that. The thing I'm trying to show you is there's a time management issue with your classes versus what you should do, what you want to do, and what you can do. And so your instructor or you are responsible for that. And you need to think through what it is you're doing. And you don't think, because we did it that way, that's how we do it today. Okay? So, you listen to some of us, and our knowledge base comes out of our sports knowledge base probably started really strong in 1990, somewhere around there, when we really got heavy into the development of the international competitors. Okay? And some updating hasn't happened as much since then. Some of us have followed trends, some of us haven't. So you guys need to back check on us. Because some of what we do is exactly where it's the state of the art today. Some of what we do is probably behind the state of the art today. That's not good or bad, it's just what it is. It's not wrong, it's just, where our baby study, we went off this direction and continue developing that direction. So we didn't probably got through. We're talking about having lesson plans for people, okay, for higher rank promotions. And these are the kinds of things that we would like to incorporate in the lesson plan. The other thing that we'd like to incorporate, and we're talking about within the Kwanmukan, is that there be an updating for any Kwanmukan sensei or shihan. And this is the kind of thing, again, that would be good for updating. The karate knowledge is very, very strong. But how can we improve the quality of the Kwanmukan by increasing the quality of the instructors? The quality of the knowledge and how to teach, or what they're teaching, and how the sports physiology behind it, so that they can improve their classes. Which means they can improve their students, and actually, like you said, train yourself up here, do the exercises that train yourself. This is what I would like to see, and I think is very, very doable within the karate concept. Now, is this a new idea? You're saying no, why?
Well, the exercises evolve time and time again. It's not a new concept.
It says the exercise is all over again, but it's not necessarily new. You're saying the exercises aren't a new concept.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. Okay? We poo-poo sport karate. Sport karate is far ahead of us in training technique. Because they follow the correct sports physiology principles. Then some of us are stuck back to what is the traditional way of doing it. Now you could also argue that sport went in different directions and the principles there to go back to traditional karate, they don't need all these sport principles. Well, you can argue that. Well, why can't you combine the two and take the best of both worlds? See, then you can produce a more productive student and hopefully reduce the learning time. Wouldn't that be great? So what are some of the principles of sports physiology? Read fast before I call somebody. I already read it while I was talking to you guys. Something else. You gotta learn to anticipate. One anticipates, we can make the first attack. We talked about the first principle. What is it? Specificity. What is that?
Being sport specific. Like when we do our warming up according to what we're going to do in that game. Being sport specific.
Everybody hear? See if you get it embellished that a little bit.
We are being sport specific. We are, like when we do our warm-ups, we're warming up with what we're going to be doing in class. We're keeping in mind what we're going to be doing in class. Like maybe we're doing throws, we're going to make sure to warm up the neck muscles before taking falls, because when you take a fall, you might jolt your neck. So we make sure we do our neck exercises when we're doing a fall. Is that?
Yeah, if you're going to twist your wrist, you're going to warm that up. But the point is, here, is that training should be designed around and reinforce and as much as possible duplicate the muscle actions and endurance needed in your martial art. The muscle actions in your martial art. Okay? Does a long distance runner train to sprint? No.
At the end.
But he doesn't train to be a sprinter. Because that requires a different muscle structure. So you can't have two runners trained the same way. Can a hurdler train like a long distance runner? He has other skills that sprinters don't even use. So you see, it's very sport specific if that is your goal. So if your goal is to be a martial artist, you have to define what that means. If your goal is to be a karate competitor, you need to define what that means. If your goal is to be able to save yourself, what do you need to do? Do you need endurance? What do you need? You need energy training or muscle training? Yeah, but you're saying yes, and we know that. The question becomes how much or which. Because you have your energy system, you have your muscular system, right? Those are basically two body systems. Okay.
If you're talking sports, you need more endurance.
Yeah, but I'm asking to save yourself. What do you need to save yourself? So last night they talked about saving yourself. What do you need to save yourself? Technique.
I think that you need to have a healthy body in order to do these movements, though. So, in order to do specific movements, you have to at least have some capacity for movement.
So you're saying that the host, the vessel, needs to be in good shape.
Yes.
Okay. Lance is saying technique, but what about technique? How? So the better the body moves, yes, but then you got does it need aerobic or anaerobic movement to support that technique? So what energy system do you need behind that technique? Not the kumite, to save yourself. This is different now.
It would be
Anaerobic. Would you everybody agree? First, does everybody know what anaerobic is? What is it? Yeah, you're nodding your head more than everybody else.
It's not using as
Wow.
much, it's not using as much oxygen to do an action.
Not quite. What's anaerobic? When your body consumes the energy faster than it can reproduce it, inject it back into muscles. Kind of like what you said, okay? So in other words, you're using up oxygen faster than you can replace it. You're using up glycogen or whatever it is in your muscles faster than you can replace it. So you're limited in how long you can last. So if you're in a fight for your life, how long will that last? Lance has a lot of confidence in You can tell that, right? Okay. But it's fast, it's quick. You can even argue that you don't need any anaerobic training because the adrenaline will take care of it for you. You can even argue that because of the length of the fight. And it might give you enough energy to run away. So I would say most karate do would agree with you. Have a healthy body. And that was what you would train for. With elements of, anaerobic and aerobic training. Good aerobic training raises the level of anaerobic. See, so your heart rate is generally considered at 85% above anaerobic, but you can raise that to 90 or 95 with training. So that means that your aerobic system, which allows you to replace your energy, your oxygen, you can keep moving for long periods of time. If you can get that to 90 to 95% of your capacity, you're an elite athlete. You follow?
Yes, sir.
So you use your aerobic foundation to raise the level to where to limit how quickly the anaerobic system comes into place. So then, if your if your dojo size is going to go to a karate tournament next month, guess who started training late? So if you're going to go to karate tournaments, you have your year planned out in advance. Okay, and as you get to where you start 3 months out with increasing your aerobic training in your class. So your exercises, your drills, and that are designed for aerobic training, even within the concept of teaching technique, as I understand it. Okay, so within the technique of teaching, you start to develop endurance. Okay, and then as you get closer, 1 month out, you can start working on that anaerobic and bring it up. At the same time, there should be some feature of strength training, because we do know that the stronger the muscles are, the faster they can fire. And maybe an element of plyometrics. So, stand up and do a leg raise. Like you did in class. Okay. Like you love us. So you go. Next. So, he put his weight on his back leg, he swung his leg up, put his weight on his front leg, and put his weight on his back leg again. Is that what you should do? Well, not necessarily, because that's how a lot of sports people would do it. The karate guy wants what? What do we say in karate?
Front foot.
The karate guy, he's incorrect for karate. You should have had your weight on your front leg and just raise your leg. Okay, but you didn't move forward. Why did you move forward?
I was anticipating going back.
Well, your leg raise is moving forward. Okay. Any comments about that?
Watch the breathing.
Well, why don't you just do it this way? This is what I do. I'm just talking about my students. Okay. So, I do so when I swing my leg up, 1, I'm like 2, 3. And so all the time, I'm got that little extra push there. That's a little bit of plyometric action. Okay? So that I'm practicing moving my body forward even on my leg raises. You see that? What I was talking about, the weights here. So, and then that's also you look at it as isolation. So sometimes you isolate your muscles. So I'm not saying there's one way to do this, but I'm just saying let's look at what's out there. Okay, and maybe get some ideas of what you do. If I had a class, 1 step at a time. Why? Because it's a big class, I can't keep them together. Okay, have you ever heard the phrase, hurting black belts is worse than hurting cats? Try to teach class at Black so kind of focus. All right, systematic. What does systematic mean? Anybody know? The principle is a systematic principle. Also goes along with the concept of adaptation. Your body learns what it learns. So, get a bowl of cereal, use your right hand, try to use your left hand. Much more brain power, put that spoon in the bowl and get it into your mouth with your left hand, than it is with your right hand with your left hand and vice versa. You can probably feel it in your left hand, Bill. You can just imagining it. So your body learns to adapt to the exercise you do. Okay? If you progressively overload, then you can bring that along and increase the performance. And I would suggest you want to do that with your students. Okay? Because you may not have to fight one person, you might fight two. That's a longer fight. Fight him and his friends. So it's possible if you can look at the framework. So you overload the body system to achieve high performance goals. If your body is progressively and systematically overloaded, it will adapt to the added demands placed on it by the training. In progressively overloading the body, consider specificity, increase the frequency, intensity, or duration of the exercises that pertain to your work environment. Losing a proper warm-up and cool-down will help avoid unnecessary injury. So you see, you have what are the words they used here? Frequency of an exercise, the intensity or duration. You can manage all three of those things. You can change the frequency, the intensity, or duration of an exercise for the training effect that you want.
I have a question about that. If we have a class that has continually, like say we have a class that has beginners all the way through to advanced students, what's the best way to do that, to make it challenging for the longer term students versus the students that are just running through?
If I were you guys, I'd be jumping, knocking his shoulder with my elbow. Did you get a question?
Yeah, take me.
She's going to teach a class that has everybody in it. How do you do it?
We take some of the higher ranks and you have them teach the lower ranks. And you separate and divide them out so that everybody is taught on the level that they are at.
Okay, so even for like the warm-ups and your,
Not necessarily.
that's the thing, because like if you're increasing the frequency and intensity of your warm-ups, usually the warm-up is done with everyone involved. Like, that's usually where the class is a big group. So like if I'm trying to intensify, like push-ups or something, and the whole class is doing them, do we have, we have certain ones that maybe do it on the knees versus certain ones that do it, regular, and then maybe put claps on for the advanced ones? How, is that what you would recommend? Or do we insist on everybody following this, a protocol that they're all the same?
I would suggest, and I never was able to prove it out, but that one expands the class to 2.5 hours. And the first hour is for the beginners, then they fall out. But it gives the advanced people a chance to get really warmed up. The second hour moves into the advanced class, and then the extra half hour is whatever you want it to be. Cool down.
45 minutes, what does she do?
Expand.
But she only has 45 minutes for the entire class. And she can't expand it because Pilates is coming into the Y after she's done.
Is it appropriate for me to break it down and have everybody, have it be different holistically for the different levels? Or?
So let me give you how I would answer that question. There's an ethics for the one solution, and I think the solution depends upon your circumstance, the length of the class. I've used Gerard's suggestion, of dismissing the lower ranking students, but sometimes I just don't have that opportunity to do that. Okay, sometimes I walk in here in the beginning class and all my teenagers' parents dump them off at the dojo to get them out of the house, and now I got them, and I got white belt beginners, and what do I do? Well, I manage expectations. In other words, as we move along through the exercises, I show alternate ways of the beginning students to perform a complicated exercise, and I make them feel good about that this is good, this is what they should do at their level, and I demonstrate it. Okay? And then I may say in this combination, I'm going to have to do something for the higher ranks since they're in class today. So this combination is going to have 3 techniques. All I want you to do is the first one. Can you do that? And I ask them. Yeah. Now, I have them committed to the problem. I've given them a solution. They're on my side now. And the high ranks know what's coming, okay? And at this point in time, I got to the point that they know not to mess up because they've been through the push-up routine that I do. That's another story. Anyway, so I've got them somewhat under wraps, okay? One time I did a survey of my kids Saturday morning, I asked how many had caffeine. Well over 50% of the kids that had caffeine in the morning. You think that was an easy class to teach? You had to need to know what caffeine?
Well, how'd they get it? I mean, what's the...
Parents gave it to them.
I mean, what for?
They had drinking coffee. I'm serious. Okay. So, but what I'm saying is that there are solutions. So if you manage the expectations of your students, okay, and you tell them it's okay to reduce the reps, or you say for this exercise, please sit down and watch so you can do it next time. So then you sit them down, they watch the high-ranking students do all these things, so you don't do a whole bunch of them. Okay, you don't do as many as you want to do. You do maybe 2 or 3, you pick maybe 3 of them, you do 3 each, it's 9 repetitions of a base, of a Kwanmukan, let's say the drop downs or whatever, because that's usually difficult for the beginners. And then you put them back on line and you move on. So you can use a combination of factors. That's how I would answer the question.
You know, underpinning that, I think, is what you see with the people that have been doing this for a very long time is teaching. There's a situational awareness on the mat that allows you to understand what that composition of the class requires.
Like
and then the ability to do it.
We just get in the habit of doing the
Just
same
same
exercises
thing.
over and over and over.
Yep.
And you just do your thing without thinking about managing the frequency or the intensity of the duration. And that can be a problem if you want to get somewhere. And you have students that get bored if it's the exact same way all the time.
Well, the final thing you do is change your own expectations.
How do you define success?
Well, you have to change the expectation of the class. How many of you have one kid when he shows up, you change your whole lesson plan?
Yep.
You see, so change your expectation of what you want to accomplish in that class. Okay, now, if you're trying to train for competition, and you got your advanced students and beginners, I just do a basic workout. Because and they can manage the expectation of intensity for the beginners, or the complexity of the exercise for the beginners, and basically just run the class for everybody. And then, make it a challenge. Okay, we're going to do 10 push-ups. Okay, you can't. I know some of you guys can't do it, but you're going to try to. Okay, and so, they can do that. You see the senior students do it. Okay, a couple years older than them, they say, okay, we're big doing that. That's what I'm going to have to learn to do. So you just create a good environment. Okay. Then I drive the senior students. Then I go after the senior students now. I got 45 minutes of warm-ups, which is essentially warm-ups. And then they stay for the second class. And again, this is my circumstance, not necessarily yours. They stay for the second class. I've got 45 minutes worth of warm-ups in that beginning class for my advanced students. I pour it on in the second class because I can.
Introduce the play.
pain, but it's a chronic pain of some sort. So they don't get bored, that's one of the things. And you know, one way that I use it, I keep it bored, is when I do, if I have a bunch of beginning students, advanced students, beginning students, it's like, hey man, I've got 10 assistant instructors and 10 beginners. Guys, get the beginner students, show them the 1 steps. All I got to do is manage my senior students, keep them focused on tasks, and go to the training aspect of trying to get the kids to teach. And then, you know, they can relate. So, again, there's other ways to go. But then I still have to figure out how to give my advanced students something to do, which is the biggest problem. Okay, and I think that's where you're going. So, you know, it depends on the purpose, what you're trying to do. Timeline, splitting the class in 2. If I have a senior instructor there with me, yeah, splitting, I'll do whatever it makes it work. I'll split the class in 2 and show them that way. Then I don't have the problem. But I answer the problem from the point of 1 instructor, everybody, 2 instructors, 3 instructors, dissect the problem and get rid of it. Feedback. Your program should be tailored to your students' needs. By monitoring your program, you assess progression, provide motivation, determine adjustments, and keeping your program on track or on task. Okay, what does that mean? First.
Yeah.
Huh?
I'm thinking.
Keith.
I think it's the aspect of a lot of the time recently. Partially at testing, sheet the sensates and the sheet on will assess, see how we are and ask on what the students learn at the various levels and we balance our training.
Yeah, essentially saying the testing is a process where you can get feedback. Pre-testing is a process where you can get feedback too. And so you have a pre-test and a test. And so or you have your students demonstrate in front of clients. Again, that allows you to get feedback. So you need to get some feedback. Or you just talk to your students. Or we call it skating the parents. Talk to them, try to find out what their concerns are about what their kids learning. It's not just a student, it's not just you. Parents paying the bill. Are they getting what their expectation is? So you need to get feedback, not just on how we're performing in the testing process. So is the testing really testing? You determine these students who go up and rank already, or you wouldn't put them in the test, or are you really testing? Army doesn't test promotions.
How many people, when they're running, so we test basically every 2 months. How many people, when you get up to that 2-month time that's coming, all of a sudden your classes start focusing on what we call standards or requirements or whatever word we're going to use. I gotta get these people up to stuff, especially when we get group assembly. Gotta get them up to stuff on implementation. Gotta get them up to stuff on release and serve. So what I've seen is the teaching changes in those. Maybe you call it pre-testing, pre-testing instruction, whatever. But it's like testing the test in school, in academic school. Crunching, right?
Well, I think the first thing you see is an increase in attendance in the class.
Yes. Yes.
And we'll get the teaching to the test in the later session, where your questions go. So you teach for the purpose of the test, not for the purpose of the person's development. Okay? And like I said, that's going to be in another session. We'll probably get into that. But, you know, you need to get feedback, you need to watch. The testing is one way to do it. All right, indicators are not a difficult concept at all. Give me an indicator for leg racing. Yeah. Weights on the front foot in the proper front stance. So if the weight's not on the front foot, the indicator for learning your front stance is not there. That they know it. Is that hard? Kid punches here. All the time, they punch here. Tell them punch in the middle of the chest, where do they punch? Where their arm goes. That's what they do. And hopefully over time, you see that targeting improve. Because they gain control of their bodies. I mean, none of us could lift our heads. None of us could turn our heads. Do you remember that? A couple of people know what I'm talking about. Some of you guys are kind of looking at me weird. You were a baby once, weren't you? The babies lift their heads. Can they turn their heads? They turn, but they can't control it. Tell them this way, their head turns that way. Tell them that way, their head turns that way. It goes with the way of the head.
Thank you.
I thought when you age, you just kind of got stuck here. You see, we all have to develop and learn, and you know, so they measure babies, they use indicators. They use weight as an indicator of muscle mass growth. Okay, and they expect certain things. You know, they look at what they doing, what they should be doing at 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. You know, that type of thing to see if they're on par. Behind or hitting somebody with a problem. And essentially that's what you're doing in karate. You're looking. You're looking at things, are they learning things that are okay. And if you design it right, yes. And if you design it right, you're progressive. What should you not teach?
You shouldn't teach stuff that's gonna make them happy. You should consider like something incorrectly, like incorrect body position that will make them have long-term.
You should not teach anything that will debilitate the body. There goes a lot of karate technique out of it. Because some of the stuff is not good. Kick a heavy bag, 20, 30 years, you won't want to kick a heavy bag after a while because action. While it's good for a while, it may not be good for long term. Okay, yes, you know, but you got to consider that some karate technique, if taught right, will not be debilitating. Okay, how many people, how far do you extend your leg in a line group when you can? How many of your students hyperextend their knee? Hyperextend their hip. Hyperextend their elbow. Hyperextend their shoulder. How many people have shoulder injuries from hyperextending their shoulder on a Nippon seeing hockey? That's a big one, plus certain age groups in martial arts. Because they let the arm go. Oh, just throw me. Don't give them this. Have some connection to your body. Save your shoulder. So we need to manage that. We need to manage so it doesn't develop to an overuse.
At what point do you start educating the student into those ideas? Locking in the pack and the trap and all that to form a good technique that's not going to be injurious.
So there's a what and a how. Where and my how? Which is really what you're asking. So you're not asking one question.
No, I'm asking.
Okay, you're asking the whole bit. Okay, well, first off, you start as a weight number. You start the day they walk in the dojo. And you continue it to the day they walk out. You have to manage your students. Now, unfortunately, a lot of your students are men who will not offend any degree whatsoever. You have to observe. You have to understand patterning. You have to watch when something's outside the pattern. That will give you a hint that there's going to be some guy got an injury you need to address. So I use pattern recognition. If anything's not inside the pattern, I know it draws my attention. I'm pretty good at that. That engineer what I don't know the pattern recognition. So if a guy comes in and their gait is different than what their gait was when they walked in the last time, I ask them. Because I catch that. You see, I'm observing for that, so I'm trained to observe. So it's because I'm trained to observe, for what? I don't know. But as an instructor, you need to observe your students. This is your feedback. Feedback isn't just out of the testing. Feedback comes from everything. And then you adjust your training programs accordingly. Okay? No kick should be stopped by a joint. No punch should be stopped by a joint. No strike should be stopped by the joint. It has to be stopped by the muscles. That's why you totally relax, you immediately tighten your muscles, and there's immediate contraction. So if your muscles do the work, you can remove a lot of the overuse injury to the joints. Now, if you want to extend your joints, use the heavy bag. Because then the heavy bag absorbs the power, not your knee joint. My side kicking is a lot easier for me. Certainly, like this side kick here, I can do that really easily. I've trained that groin muscle so many times it doesn't get in the way. I tore it in karate, I tore it in soccer, so that's not considered a healthy kick. But that's not overuse injury, that was probably something else, but I ripped the muscle so much that it doesn't impact anything. Now, is that good? Could be a problem someday, but so far it hasn't. So I've been lucky. I've had knee issues, and that's when I stopped kicking. I stopped my kicking, front kicking out there now. I use the muscle. We did a study on knees back in the DAU days. And we found that proper kicking helped uprooting knees. Improper kicking did not. So how do we help uprooting knees? By teaching the muscles to do the work. How is most sports rehabilitation done? By teaching the muscle to compensate for the injury. Whether the injury is to a ligament or tendon or to a muscle structure. You build the muscle structure up. Okay? If I'm wrong, speak up, okay? Want to add to what I just said?
Anything else specific about knees? And this is personal. Anything else specific about knees? I've got almost going on bone struggle with it. Anything I shouldn't be doing? I don't do drop-outs for knees.
I'd have to do that on a new person basis. I'd have to do that on a one-on-one basis. But, I've had knee issues all my life. My first thing I did was put the front kicking all the way out. Okay, the second thing I do is every time I put my weight down, my leg bone is straight over my foot. So you see, I'm going up and down. Okay, I'm also aware of when the activity I do, when I go down from here, my knees are going to shift now. When I come up here, my knees are going to shift. So there's a shifting in the knee joint. Is there a name for that?
Transition, transverse rotation.
So I avoid as much as possible activity which creates that transition in an uncontrolled environment. Okay? Or an environment where so I'm doing this, I come up in front of me, I'm below that transition. Okay, I'm not going to come up here above it and then drop down below it. So I control, in my training, the range of motion that I use for exercises so that they don't impinge on that. Now, whether that'll work for you or not, I don't know specifically, but I know that for me, I've been able to control that by staying within a range of motion on my knees. So when I'm down, I'm down, when I'm up, and I don't do a lot of going in between unless I'm using the bone to support most of the weight.
Thank you.
Does that help?
It helps, appreciate
And
it.
again, that works for me. I don't know if it worked for you. Do you have anything? I've asked you, this is somewhat his area of expertise, so.
I do the same thing, right knee, arthritic, kicking's not as good. I certainly don't do back stretches anywhere on the right side. I just can't. There's a lot of specific exercises that work therapy had scoped, but also the major help with that was doing specifically exercises for it, doing strengthening, instead of actually on a trainer, functional trainer, do a lot of backwards walks that are weighted, that are kind of a functional movement, but also gear that strengthening the quads. And that, but with proper alignment, that's actually been extremely helpful. So,
I think with Mr. A's and some of the how to do the training and learning to just turn differently.
Yeah.
How I turn my knees supporting the hands.
So how do you turn?
Sometimes I don't do a very good job of turning my foot. So
The easiest way to turn is not to turn. Take the turn out of the turn. I did not pivot. I removed the pivot. The pivot is friction on the floor. Okay, increased friction. My knee's turning. So if my knee's turning and the foot is having friction, I'm going to turn my knee and my foot's going to follow. So on some things, you're better off to turn your foot and then move. So I'm here, I turn. I've got pretty good doing that in this rising, and nobody knows what I'm doing, I just do it. And I've been able to remove that twisting action from my knees. Now, you think about it. I think a good example, but let me let's talk about taking. So, when you cross your leg, where do you point your foot? Well, if you point it straight ahead, what are you going to do? You put it not straight ahead, it's sideways. Is it straight ahead or is it sideways? What is straight ahead? Well, no. Straight ahead is sideways. This is over there. Now think about this. However I put my foot on the ground, if I relax my body, it will turn to the direction that's natural. When I put my foot straight ahead, you notice I turn here. If I put my foot here and allow my body to turn, it turns to here. Here, it turns to here. So now I put my leg raise here, I'm fine. But now I point the foot this way and I try to bring it this way and I'm creating action on the knee and on the hip. Where if I'm this way and relax my body, I can do that without any trouble. Or I let my body turn to my foot and I use that momentum to swing my leg up. And my body's doing it. I'm not doing it. I'm not controlling it. See, I think that needs further study in how we perform technique. It goes to the fact that I believe you should be moving your way through here. I have people argue with me that they shouldn't do it. They got them on video doing it. You see, because it's a natural action. Walking movement should not be unnatural. And that's where the issues come into play. Okay, and then learning how power is created and distributed, so that you don't turn your foot in like this to brace the power, which is done by a lot of people. Either let the power go, or you understand that you're bracing power with that. And then you design accordingly, you do this in such a fashion that it doesn't cause a twisting of the hip. it causes braking action. And the braking then is okay for the body if you do it correctly. If you do it incorrectly, it's not. That's the difference in the styles of karate. They create so much power that there has to be some way of dissipating the power. And my particular way of doing it is what I do. And if it works for you, fine. If it doesn't, fine. That's also fine. So to move the class along, though, so I did put in here, after talking about all this stuff, punching board and heavy back training. You know, you need to do something to organize the flow of your body. And so just kicking a bag or hitting muscle water doesn't do any good unless you're practicing breathing. So all your hand, foot, eye, breath coordination has to all go together, kata and your muscle right training and your back training. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I'm going to keep going on and avoiding injury. So training errors can occur when you take on too much physical activity too quickly, going too fast, exercise for too long, or simply doing too much of one type of activity. You can strain your muscles and lead to an overuse injury. Does that all have to be done in one class? One class can do it. Can over time do it. Yeah. And so we see a lot of karate guys with overuse injuries. And as instructors, you can't stop everybody from having an overuse injury, but you can sure do a lot to eliminate the, what's the word for intensity, but the, how bad it is. How bad it is. So you can do that to reduce that and then help the student manage it. And you should be doing that for yourself. I've never trusted my instructor, even George Anderson, to fix my body or be aware of when I had an issue. Would you ever trust George Anderson to care about whether you were injured? I mean, the guy's very important in our lives, but he's still at fault. And it's not wrong to recognize it. But one of them was, well, you're hurt, so get over here and do it anyways. And for the right kind of person, in the right kind of situation, that's what you should do. But today, it doesn't play that well because we don't have 20-year-old testosterone-driven people who think that's cool. Am I going to disagree with that statement? I'd like to see. So, I mean, how many of you guys, if I got, let's say, a brown belt woman, had you stand up there, and she hit you as hard as she could, knock the wind out of you, how many of you guys would be willing to let her punch you again to show you that she could take her punch and not have the wind knocked out of you? How many of you guys would take that punch twice? Let's be honest, every single one of you would. How many of you would do it 3 times? Now, does that make sense to you? Does that make sense to you? Does that make sense to you? There's a little bit of difference in wiring. I've taught guys into taking that shot, in a class, a self-defense class, and the girls just do it, but they can't predict, they can't understand that. But sometimes, if you're going to defend yourself from women, the thing you're defending yourself against is a male. If you don't have any idea what they think, how much they can take, you're going into a football game without a game plan, you're going to get killed. So you have to understand that. The wiring is different. Okay? If you hit a guy and he's not laughing, then you didn't hit him hard enough. I guarantee you. You didn't hit him anywhere near hard enough. If you hit a guy hard enough, then he reacts to your punch, he will laugh. I don't know why. Alright. But anyways, training errors. So we need to do that. The other thing, and this is where karate guys argue forever, and guys will live or die on this. Improper technique can take a toll on your body. If you use poor form, you can overload certain muscles and joints and cause overuse injury. And I've been arguing for the last few years that some of what we do, some of what we consider correct technique is not. correct technique and can cause injury. And so you get into, well, this is the style. This is how we teach. And there were many things that we learned back then. And a lot of them we've discarded. I say we, I'm talking to the young, we've discarded. That we don't teach you guys because we realized that our bodies didn't condone that one. Some things we teach that, yeah, our bodies took it and absorbed it and we survived it, we figure you can too. Other stuff we read as, and it's not something we ever talk about, it's just something that you see. That you learn from teaching. You start losing students, you start looking at why. Well, we don't want the group coming up to start losing students and have to figure out why. We like to give you our experience of losing students so that you can lose as many as we did. So you've got to look at the function of the technique, how it's performed. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know what your students are doing. And so you have to understand that. So you have a kata. Okay, and you look at the lines of the kata. Okay, Tracy did the first move of Heian Sandan, and Chris did the first move of Heian Sandan. And just hold still. Chris Baker didn't get it. Just do the first move of Heian Sandan. Just and hold still. Is there a difference?
Yes.
And where's the difference? Look at the arm. The ratio for the arm is different. The ratio of the upper arm to the lower arm. We all know that, right? Was it the women's forearm's longer, right? Okay, so now do you think that's going to make a difference in how you apply strength? So you think that might make a difference in doing push-ups? Okay, do you think other differences might do a difference in doing sit-ups? You get women doing sit-ups for hours after the guy's died. That's a distribution of body weight. So those are things you got to think about. Training errors, technique errors, you've got to consider the structure you're working with. And it might have to be adjusted slightly for men or women. Okay, we did talk a little bit about stretching. And we talked about, there's a static stretch. You stretch slowly and hold for 8 to 10 seconds. You can find everybody up to 30 seconds of hold stretching. Okay? But again, we also talk about time management. So, but you should be very familiar with the training concepts there. Okay, there is a camera back there, so nobody's going to stand in front of the camera. So
Good. You're good.
be sure of that. We talked about videotaping heads at the beginning of class.
Yeah, somebody who was filming at the Winter Games really should have paid attention to their camera angles.
All right, and let's see. Contract relaxed stretching. Contract relaxed stretching is tricky. That's where everybody know what that is? So you stretch the muscle, you stretch, then you push down against it, and then you relax and you take it up higher. Done incorrectly, it can grip the muscle apart. Done correctly, it has a training value. And then you have the ballistic stretching, which we talked a little bit about. Some of our exercises create ballistic stretching in our warm-ups that maybe we should be trying to get the student to do until their body's warmed up. And we talked about having to warm up the muscles before the stretching really should be done. Yes?
First newcomers, you mind explain what ballistic stretching is?
That's bouncing when you're stretching.
The bouncing. Thank you.
Okay?
It's with the leg raises that I had to do.
Okay. That's kind of not right.
Right, yeah.
It wasn't right.
Ballistic stretching. It's what I always taught the kids when I was young, because that was the thing at the time. That was a newfangled thing. Okay? And then after about 30 years old, I learned that, yeah, you're not supposed to do that. Oh, I didn't know that. But then, I don't think it's necessarily bad for a trained athlete who knows what they want to accomplish, understands the risks, and has been properly trained in the exercise. I would agree that it's not good for the general mass population in the karate class where you can't manage the individual and know, because you could, there's too many different, everybody's different thing. It's probably not a good idea to do that. Okay. All right. So overuse injury. We've been talking about that. And the definition they give here, an injury that occurs as a result of repeated motions. Machinery wears out over time because of friction. Think your body might do that? It can replace things, but not forever. Or not as fast as it did at one time. That's probably more the case for a lot of us. Small injuries to the musculoskeletal system weaken the body and cause overuse injuries to occur. Most sports injuries are due either to traumatic injury or overuse of muscles and joints. They can be prevented with proper conditioning and training, wearing appropriate protective gear, and using proper equipment in a proper way. Most common signs of overuse injury are what? What's the most common sign? Pain. No pain, no gain.
Prolonged soreness.
That's in your butt.
Prolonged soreness.
Prolonged soreness. You get the pain in your muscles. Okay, no pain, no gain. Well, that's lactic acid. And, the more your muscles train the activity, the less that develops and it clears out better. And so, if you start exercising muscles you haven't you're using, yes, you get muscle pain because your muscles are working differently. But then if you use the muscles and if you train, runners don't get the pain all the time. So if they're getting pain and they're a trained runner, their pain is coming probably from overuse injury. But if you get a guy who's running and then they swim, their muscles for swimming that you don't use for running, those muscles are going to get sore. That's a different kind of soreness. That's a soreness, not a pain. What's another sign of overuse injury? Swelling. Does swelling always occur? What causes joint swelling from an overuse injury? Maybe you should answer that one.
Inflammation.
Inflammation. What causes inflammation?
Injuries to the tissues.
Specifically, what causes it? Cartilage floating around in the knee joint, causing the swelling. If the cartilage is floating around in the knee joint causing the swelling, you're one of probably the 98% of the people whose knees swell. There's about 8% of the people, my statistics may be off, whose knees don't swell when you get cartilage inside of them. Okay? So, if your knee's swelling, you have rubbed something that's rubbed something loose. You follow what I'm saying? So, definitely overuse from wearing something out. Okay? So those cartilage cells can cause some swelling in the knees, and I don't know the exact thing behind it. What else tells you? I mentioned this one earlier. What's the next one? Change in technique or form. Okay, some sports use the word form, we use the word technique. But the form of how you do this. Okay, so I mentioned you watch your students come in, they're walking a little differently. If their gait slightly changed, you get attuned to that. And then that keys you in. That maybe you've got an issue. Issue most likely is going to go to overuse injury or traumatic injury. Traumatic injury would be, a student comes in and you get a funny front kick, you lock the joints and get injured real fast, that's traumatic, versus a 2-year student says, well, my knees are getting to the point I can't train anymore, what do I need to do? Well, you've got to go back. You can't go back. You should be managing that from the day they walk into the dojo. Decreased interest in practice, probably because of the pain. But you'll see that. No motivation. Okay? So let's see here. Who have we been hearing from? I think I'm the senior. Why don't you read the common, give us a brief overview of the common types of opioid injuries. A brief overview.
The knee, knee joint, people who pull on things.
Okay, louder,
Are you jumping?
louder.
Little league elbow or shoulder.
Okay, first one was jumper's knee.
Pardon?
First one is jumper's knee. Right? Does everybody understand what that is?
Right. Little league elbow or shoulder. Repetitive overhead throwing maneuvers that cause damage and inflammation of growth plates and bones in the arms, or as a result of fracture.
How do you get little leaguer's injury in karate? Back fist strikes. With the joints. Little leaguer's injury is this way. Back fist goes same way. Like hand strike. Full power knife hand strikes that don't hit anything means either the muscle in the joint has to absorb the power that's created. Thus, working on equipment, but then working on equipment for young people isn't good because then you smash the growth plates. Jumper's knee. How do you get jumper's knee?
It's pronating concept, getting your knee up in front of your toes.
I think that's one way of saying it. You don't need to make much extend the knee. Do you think that to do the same thing? Or is that a different type of injury? I say, because you're jumping, you have the takeoff and you have a landing, both. You can lock your knees on the takeoff, you can lock your knees on the landing, you can bang your legs on the landing. I think those are two different things. Osteochondritis dissecans. That's why I was having you read it. Read it.
Osteochondritis dissecans, joint pain and swelling, most commonly occurring in the knee, elbow, and ankle.
So we don't know if we can tie, I think we can tie that to a lot of karate motions that aren't properly taught in correct form and technique. Okay. And again, the biggest one is using the joints to stop the power that you create as opposed to using the muscles to absorb it. Somebody has to, somehow that power has to dissipate. And dissipate it incorrectly, okay, because karate, you get the overuse injury not just in form, but it's exacerbated because of the strength of the action. That is incorrect. Meaning if I do this incorrectly, and that's all I do, but if I do it this way, at some point that's going to create faster than just doing this both. Next one.
Sever's disease. Sever's disease is one of the most common causes of POK in children and often occurs during adolescence when children are growth spurts, also known as osteochondrosis or apophysitis. Sever's disease is an inflammatory condition of the growth plate and heel bone. Running, jumping, and being active due to repetitive stress on the growth plate and quick spikes of running.
Son of a gun, we want our kids to run, jump, and be active, and the next thing we know, it causes a problem. Again, it's called management. But you have to be cognizant of what you do should be managed. Next one.
Shin splints, excessive running on hard surfaces, concrete, and improper shoe wear often cause shin splints.
Do we have that issue in karate? How?
Which way is jumping, deposit, repetitive impact.
So in other words, if I don't get it from jumper's knee, I'm going to get it from the shin splint. If I overjump.
Or Seaver's disease.
Huh?
Or Seaver's disease, or osteochondritis.
Take your credit for it. Okay, read the next one.
Osgood bladder disease, pain at the front of the knee due to inflammation of the growth plate at the upper end of the tibia, the shin bone.
Can you explain that one? I think that needs a little work.
It's the same as Seaver's disease, except it's in the knee where the patellar tendon from quadriceps without the patella, kneecap, the tendon goes in the kneecap, attaches in the growth center, secondary growth center, and the tibia, the shin. And so what that is an overuse injury of that attachment point where the patellar tendon attaches into
karate actions might cause that? I'm asking the question because I don't know the answer to that.
Overly deep stances.
Height, repetitive, jumping,
Do you agree with this statement over the deep stances?
repetitive.
Repetitive. So would repetitively mean going in and out of it or just staying there for a long time?
I think more going in and out. To feel contraction, relaxation, that kind of thing.
Okay, keep going.
Stress fracture occurs when the muscles become fatigued and transfer the overload of stress to bones. Bone is a living tissue and is constantly in a balanced cycle of buildup and breaking down. If a child overdoes activity and too much stress is placed on bones, the body will not be able to build up bone fast enough. Eventually the bone fails and a small crack or stress fracture grows.
What do you think about that one? You can speak up.
Okay.
Your area of expertise is this area. So he's I don't know if everybody knows he's a medical doctor. So that's how you got picked for this to begin with.
Stress fractures less commonly occur in kids. Their bones tend to be a lot more flexible and pliable. They can actually apply more to the adult population where they're not. And so the stress fracture, usually, most commonly foot, metatarsal, sometimes heel bone, tibia, big time with runners, marathon runners from overuse. Constant repetitive shock in the foot, flexion forces in the metatarsals, those are beams in the foot that are constantly flexed and bent. So repetitive actions, muscular weakness, not full development of muscles, conditioning, and then overuse will cause weakening of the fibers and bones, whatever bone is involved, which creates inflammation. It's a precursor to the bone actually snapping.
So if you're over 20, it's probably not a good idea to do back handsprings anymore.
Not more than 5.
Huh?
Not more than 5.
Not more than 5 in a row. Not more than 5 in a row, right? Okay. But you get the idea. That's why your body tells you no on some of these things as you get older. Because the body's sometimes smarter than you. You got to listen to it. Avoiding overuse injury. Use proper form. Use the correct technique. Using the correct technique is crucial to preventing overuse injuries. This again is where some people are willing to do or die on a principle that maybe is incorrect because it is the traditional way of doing things. You don't know what the traditional way of doing things is. You only know what the person who told you the traditional way of doing things is, and you have no idea whether they know what the traditional way of doing things is. The traditional way of doing things in karate center. When they come into the door, they bow to the flag. That's my tradition. It's nowhere else. In any dojo that I trained in, I just made it in my dojo. Or maybe your dojo does the same thing, but it's something that we do. We have our way of doing it. The two-hand handshake is fully a part of tradition. Okay, pace your students. There may be other people who use that tradition. We might have stolen it from somewhere, but basically it's not, you don't see that in other martial arts centers. Pace your students. Important. Gradually increase activity levels and mix up routines with cross-training. What does that mean? What does mix up routines with cross-training? It means do football and football, do basketball and basketball, do baseball and baseball, and if you don't make anything, do karate and do soccer. That's what it means. Doesn't mean what we would. So, maybe we could create a karate construct that would change the training over time that would enable different energy sources, different muscles to be utilized. Your throwing, maybe grappling would be different than doing karate. Okay. So you could probably do a little bit of that within that framework. I would think. But basically, that's what it means. It means training different things. do we have any questions?
I have a comment. The takeaway for me in this whole session is the critical importance of the very early stages of training. Because if you get started on the wrong, going in the wrong direction on the chute with either a child or an adult or anything in between, the lasting damage that can be done is consequential. So those first 6 months, first year, it's a bad time to make mistakes.
Also on that note, going back to going on that note, or off of that, going back to the beginning of the session, is observing the students in class, their physical features, to see that with a platform. Are you going to have to do plyometric exercises for 30 minutes? You know what I mean? I think you're asking for injuries, especially with these scenarios.
I make my kids run at some point or another.
Just to watch them.
Just to watch them run. Because you can pick up flat-footedness and how they run. Also, you can pick up the proper running technique, how they use their feet. And then you know, are they slamming their heels to the ground, are they hitting flat-foot, flat the ear like this when they run, are they rolling through their feet? So you can observe those things, and it might give you a little idea of some things that you need to teach. I make them hop, so they hopping on the heel, they hopping on the ball of their foot. That's a developmental thing. So if they're hopping on a heel, I teach them how to hop on the ball of the foot. That helps increase their development. Okay? My knee raises. All my knee raises have a cross action because that helps reading skills. You see, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there you guys can learn about and bring into your karate training or the karate training that you do for other people, which is different. Are there any other questions? I'm going to address a question that came up last night. Okay? And that is, Larry, would you reapproach your question?
Last night when we were doing, when we were getting brought into the whole combat pieces to it, we were going right into an interaction where somebody's just immediately, I must destroy this person. And the expectation was the level of violence is here. And which is great, but I struggled with we talked a little bit about matching appropriate violence. How do you know? What made you decide that this person needs to die because he came within my range? And so the way things were being presented, I struggled a little bit with so what were the indicators that it's going to kill me? And I need to put my finger inside his eye. And I need to take him down.
Good. Would you answer that question?
I think my answer to that question was, I think what I took out of it after we talked about the whole thing is just being more aware of the person's intent, trying to pick up on the clues on the blading, the grooming, and the other things that may give me an uneasy feeling that I'm just picking because Alex are here. But, his abdomen was severely hurt. Did he say something that made me believe he's going to do something serious for me? So that now when he's in my circle, I need to do something.
Well, what you didn't like was they went right to red. So if we were to take a situation, say yellow, orange, red, yellow, light, orange, red are more dangerous, and red, red. The answer to the question last night was right to the red. His question was how do you determine it's in the red? And they went right to the red. Now, I'm looking at that, and I see, okay, we got the qualified immunity response. But when you're in a situation, you should be evaluating. Okay, and you've got to go with your gut. That's all you've got. Okay? You can look at these things, and even if somebody is doing a grooming activity, does that mean that that's what that's going to lead to? And then can you control that by controlling your distance? Now, if your job is to bring this person in, then you have a different job. If your job is a civilian, okay, then you try to do things which you control, the boundary setting. So you talk about awareness, you talk about boundary setting. So first off, you need awareness, and within that awareness, you need to evaluate. And so you use, yellow, orange, red. You don't have to conceptualize that. But that is gut, okay? And then you go from that if it raises to the level of combat, okay, then that's a different matter. So how do you raise or decide that, okay? And you can do that through, and the stuff that we taught, we did the fast defense, was through distance, okay? If he enters into your space, then you should be elevating. Now, maybe you don't have a chance. The guy hits you in the back of the head with a baseball bat, you never see it coming. Maybe you turn and you see it right away. Maybe you shoot the red. Yeah, there's some sort of input that comes into your brain that tells you to go there. But there's no perfect system. The other thing is that I think is intended to your question is that Anderson would teach the I'm not going to say this correctly, but more almost like a pyramid structure of violence. Sort of like the use of force, but the old use of force principle. Is that, but he did it in such a manner that if you have too much stimuli, or too many things, so if a guy is going to hit me, if a guy's just going to argue with me, I do this, if he's going to hit me, I do that, if he's going to kill me, I do this, and all of a sudden, how do you got to not only pick the situation, you got to pick your response. So Anderson tried to come up with a response that you could enter into the response, and the same action, the same technique, could elevate the violence without having an additional thing to think about. So the guy, so he comes after me and he grabs my hand. Now this is contextual. This is for the sake of the discussion. Understand? So it's just context. That's all we're doing here. So he grabs my hand and I move here. Really? Okay. Just back up. All right. He grabs my hand and I move here and I whack the back here and he punches his head into the ground. He grabs my hand and I bring it this way. I say, okay, we need to talk. Okay. 3 different responses. 3 different, a different level of violence on my part. But I could have updated any of those immediately to a more violent situation without having to learn a different program for that situation. This is what Anderson taught. And he used the releases as his context in which to teach this. So I think that your question has 2 answers. All right? So if you want to read the first answer, then, you guys, there's a PDF file of book Karate Techniques and Tactics, last chapter in the book. I showed that to you earlier today. And I think that answers pretty much the first part of the question. The idea of the elevation of violence is the study of the releases. And so we would have different levels of releases. They kind of got turned into the type of technique, but they actually do increase the level of violence. Okay? And some of the things that aren't in the quote level releases, just simply the movement of the body using the concept of shielding. Okay, moving to position advantage and shielding was also part of the release thing. But for the purposes of this question, should be definitely put forth in the actual releases that got designed for students to learn. That really isn't one of them.
Wouldn't you also say that it has to be approached, number one, a lot of the stuff that's taught in this frame comes from cops that have a completely different mindset than civilians. So we have to look at Ohio's law of escalation. You have the right to escalate by 1. Granted, that's an intellectual thing, but that also, I believe, has to be introduced in the course of self-defense, which gives a person an ability to start reading things through training and a lot of practice.
We don't have the value of qualified immunity as a civilian, but on the other side of the point, we have other defenses instead.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have something to?
Can I ask a question of the class?
Sure.
How many in your level of training can see the other person decide to attack you, and then at the moment they attack, you'll know? How many can do that? Really?
You know, could you
I hate to
rephrase?
say this, but this is a principle of sport karate, that we downplay sport karate, and here it is. If you haven't done kumite, you haven't had to do sendo sen, gozo sen, sendo sen, sensendo sen. If you haven't practiced those three concepts, then you got a problem. Because you're not understanding how to recognize that moment of attack. And in the martial arts, the concept, philosophically, if you wish, is that if you can, you have when a person moves, when a person decides, begins the movement as he's moving, or when he decides. So if you see him, before you see that he's going to decide to attack, that is when you do sense and no sense. You control the situation from there, the situation goes away, you never have to punch or hit or move physically. That's the concept.
I do know.
This is a different concept than approaching it, from a law enforcement perspective. It's just a different concept, yes.
I do know that maybe if I'm in a bar and there's a drunk person and there's a bunch of people around, the level of my putting that person away from me is going to be much lower than if I'm on a dark alley, and being attacked by somebody with a knife. Or if I'm, in a college dorm and there's, maybe a date rape type thing happening. I'm not going to put out some college kid's eye, but there's situations that are going to be definitely, obviously, a little bit lower. So yes, you can just by your situation determine in some ways the escalation.
We're going to call this session. As far as getting signatures for this session, the panel here, and you're really part of the panel, so any one of these four individuals can sign off on it. Okay, so you want to keep track? Give them sign off on your thing. We'll start in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
I'm going to do the first part. As we go. I'll try to keep it down to no more than 20 minutes so that we can out of this. Yeah, I did. But I brought the outlaw for the outlaw.
I can do that. Then you and Connie can split. Okay. Then you want to talk about parties? Okay.
Then we see how it works.
You should probably have one or two people on your panel and encourage them to somebody in experienced person and put them on there and try to. I mean, I did a lot of it, but I also brought other people into
It was not easy. That's why I left. I left here in good spirit. Where'd you go? Yeah, right. Come on. 12:30. Come on. Know yourself better than this.